Good evening, thanks for coming. So, as Deepak said, this is the second installment of our consciousness studies. So, kind of looping around again, going a bit deeper, and what we will be doing in the next couple of months, there's 12 talks of the 4 people who are regularly involved, and then we have 2 guest speakers. So, as you mentioned, we have the science and philosophy perspective, the Eastern perspective, kind of also some sort of self-discovery, because obviously consciousness is about us, so it makes sense to think about what does it mean to have consciousness and what can we find in it, and especially kind of focus also on the masters of consciousness. These are people who have kind of been working with their consciousness for ages, the shamans, the mystics, the meditators, and the psychonauts who have kind of traveled through consciousness. And kind of the sacred feminine aspect. So a lot of psychedelic culture is always sort of centered around kind of a male perspective. So Kasia will be giving us kind of a different perspective on that. And just generally kind of this psychedelic culture and knowledge and embodiment and kind of, what we can see there. And one sort of special aspect is idealism. Like, what does it mean if everything of reality is based on consciousness, and kind of why this is having a renaissance in the philosophy of science. And the last talk of Deepak is going to be about post-humanism. So kind of a pretty sort of colorful expose we're going to have. So Deepak, so he founded this academy about kind of these humanistic skills in a digital age, and you were in the corporate world, and kind of, came back to sort of philosophy and kind of exploring the Eastern wisdom traditions. So Kasia, she is a bodywork practitioner. She assists psychedelic therapy. Her focus is on this feminine mysticism, and she's a psychonaut and has a PhD in cell and tissue biology. And Simone, also from the corporate world, in HR, finance professional, business consultant, entrepreneur, and lecturer, coach, and she kind of stumbled upon shamanism, and that's kind of what she does. And she's giving actually 2 times a 2-day workshop on kind of this initiation to shamanism. And then we have Amba as a guest speaker, and she'll be talking about kind of, her background is kind of psychology, psychopathology, neurophysiology, and ethics, and she spent a lot of time with indigenous kind of cultures in South America, kind of working on the medicine, these healing systems. Most of you know ayahuasca and kind of like the bigger context of like how this is lived and kind of what we can draw from that. And then we have Nitin as another guest speaker. So he's kind of a business technology consultant, a startup founder, and he's a data AI specialist, and has a PhD in data science, computational biology, but he also kind of is a meditator and kind of explorer of sort of spiritual aspects of existence. So myself, I studied theoretical physics with Martin. But then kind of my academic career sort of brought me into complexity science, where kind of like physics is a lot of equations and complex systems. We'll talk about that a bit later. It's more like many interacting things which are easier to kind of understand algorithmically than with equations. And kind of my day job was always in finance and recently crypto, but I'm trying to move away from that because my interest is in like what is reality and what is consciousness. So I've written 2 books about that. The first one came out in 2019. The second one's going to come out end of March. And it's kind of, the things I'm talking about are like, if you want to have a deep dive, that's where you can find more information. So let's start with today's session. So the foundations of consciousness, science and philosophy. So what do we know about consciousness, but from a Western perspective? Like, what's our sort of academic knowledge about consciousness? And this is what I'll be taking you through. So talking about some facts of consciousness, and then kind of like yeah, what has academia been up to, and since how long has it been interested in consciousness, like opposed to sort of Indian wisdom traditions that have been like dealing with consciousness for millennia. And yeah, we pretty quickly have to move into metaphysics, into philosophy, because this is not only a science question. And we'll see how kind of physicalism, this is kind of a modern word for materialism, the idea that everything is reducible to material stuff, like how that has been an important part in how we understand consciousness or how we don't understand consciousness. And then just a little bit of then what science is and kind of this complexity stuff. And to end with kind of, yeah, what are the current topics people are talking about in the philosophy of mind. So, if you think about it, we are all locked in our consciousness. We only have indirect access to an external reality. I mean, it seems so natural that we're like walking and sort of existing in kind of this objective reality, but actually our brain is in the dark and we only have indirect kind of experiences of something that's going on outside, and it's always filtered through our consciousness. Even if we do science and experiments and like read values from instruments, these are all mediated through our consciousness. So kind of this is sort of the first thing we have to realize, that we're actually always locked in our consciousness. And this kind of seems to imply that there's sort of two realms of existence. So one is like this mental thing I have, and the other thing is this external world that's out there. So Plato was like one of the first thinkers to like sort of really get serious on this sort of mental aspect of reality. So he had this idea that there was this transcendent realm of perfect forms where kind of everything which is physical is like an instance, an instantiation of this template which is perfect and unchanging and eternal, and kind of this mind-like perfect sphere of ideas and forms. So that was kind of like the first exploration sort of into this idea that there's like this unseen, non-physical realm of existence. And then Descartes, with his sort of hardcore skepticism, was like, actually, the only thing I know is that I'm thinking. So everything else is like debatable. The world I'm seeing, am I seeing you? Are you like a projection? Is this a simulation? Whatever, we don't know. The only thing I know is that I'm thinking. And actually, I think a better way to put it would be, I'm experiencing, therefore I am. I think that's maybe a bit more sort of general than to kind of thinking. And then we have George Berkeley, Bishop Berkeley. He was like a full-on idealist, and he was like, actually, there's no physical world, it's all like in the mind of God. And he said, to be is to be perceived. So again, kind of this focus on sort of perception as kind of like a core component of consciousness. And then we have Immanuel Kant, who like really brought in this sort of Copernican revolution into philosophy, where he was saying, actually, knowledge isn't something you get from outside to the inside. Your mind structures the outside world you perceive. And so his idea was that there's this world we perceive, the phenomenon he called it, but that's just like the thing that we are kind of working with. Behind that, kind of the thing in itself, the noumenon, the real reality, we can never touch it, we can never know what it is, so we're always kind of like distanced from this true level of like transcendental reality or whatever it is, and kind of what we only see is kind of like this sort of faint sort of projection or whatever from like this thing in itself. And yeah, you can have some crazy thought experiments. Like if you think about it, what your brain is doing now is processing electrical signals, electrochemical signals. So if you take a brain, you put it in a vat and you keep it alive, you could, in theory, take all the nerves that go in, hook them up to a computer, and send exactly the same sense signals or electrical signals to your brain, and you would have exactly the same experience you're having now. There was no way that you don't know that your brain is actually hooked up to something simulating your reality, or that you're actually in a three-dimensional world and you are perceiving something. So this is the brain in the vat idea, which, yeah, kind of crazy. And yeah, there's even like crazier sort of thought experiments. In cosmology, like the time spans for like how long the universe could exist are so vast that probability theory tells you that basically everything that can happen will happen at one point, even if it's like super improbable. So the idea of a Boltzmann brain is that you, for some reason, this event that happens is that suddenly a brain emerges with like all your like subjective perception and your memories you're having now, and it just briefly comes into existence and then goes out again. But kind of that this would also sort of quickly feel as though you're like in a world perceiving, but actually it's just like sort of this super improbable event that suddenly like conjured up this brain that's having experiences which then kind of dissolves again. I mean, not to say that like I mean, these are like semi-serious sort of thought ideas, but it's about, yeah, if you start to think about like probabilities, long time spans, and like, kind of, we know that, yeah, sort of, somehow in the brain, the thing you are having now is, it could be replicated and like, probably will make the same experiences. And where it gets more serious in philosophy is the problem of other minds. So I know that I exist, but how do I know that you have the same thing that I have going on in my mind? And this is called the problem of other minds. Obviously, it doesn't make much sense to assume that it's only me. So that's why kind of it's a default position to think that, well, actually we all kind of have this same perception thing going on. But that's actually, yeah, solipsism, which says there's only your own mind, everything else is constructed, created, projected by your mind. And this is like something which really scares philosophers because there's no empirical or theoretical argument to diffuse solipsism. And so the only reason why philosophers kind of ignore it, because this has no utility, because if you say it's only my mind, then it's like, where do you go from there? So kind of we see sort of where the philosophy sort of, yeah, it gets you kind of to pretty wild sort of existential ideas. Yeah, so academia, it's kind of embarrassing if you kind of look at the timeline. So, okay, way back 1890, William James, he was like one of the first psychologists. He inhaled nitrous oxide, laughing gas, had a super psychedelic experience, and for the rest of his life he was dealing with the implications of what he was experiencing there. And he was at the time then one of the most famous American philosophers. And he thought of consciousness as a stream of thought. So kind of like the very first sort of ideas in the philosophy of mind. And then 1929 we have C.I. Lewis, another philosopher, who came up with the idea of qualia. So qualia are these atoms of subjectivity, of perception. So the redness of red, or the toothache, or the feeling of love, or all these kind of little atoms you can put together of what you're experiencing. And he said a qualia is like literally kind of the irreducible atom of all these different sort of experiences you can have. And then fast forward to 1974, where another philosopher wrote an influential paper called What It Is Like to Be a Bat. And Nagel was arguing, okay, you can basically know everything about echolocation, but you will never know what it feels like to be an entity that perceives reality through echolocation. So this is kind of still one of the most popular and best definitions of consciousness we have. So how bad is that? That what is consciousness? Well, consciousness is if it feels like to be something. This is our best definition still after all those years, because there's literally no better or more stricter definition from science or philosophy. So it's about this inner view into outside reality. That's kind of the focus there. And then in 1992, another philosopher, Frank Jackson, he had this thought idea. So you have Mary, and she's like this expert neuroscientist, and she's locked in a black and white room. She's never seen color. But she studied everything about the brain and about color and the physics of color and what color is and how the brain processes color. And then one day Mary escapes and she runs into the garden and she sees a red flower. And originally Jackson argued, hey, she's making a new experience. For the first time, she's experiencing the qualia of redness, which means that a pure kind of physicalist description of consciousness is lacking, because before she knew everything about that, but she missed kind of this experience. So that was kind of used as kind of an argument against sort of this physicalist thinking. Weirdly, Jackson made a 180, and now he says that actually this argument supports physicalism because some whatever technical stuff. So yeah, and then in 1990, this is the first kind of peer-reviewed publication on consciousness, where Francis Crick, the co-discoverer of DNA, and a young Christoph Koch, they wrote Towards a Neurobiological Theory of Consciousness, where they were arguing for neural correlates of consciousness. So they were thinking, okay, if you feel pain, let's go and look what happens in the brain, like where can we see differences? So these neural correlates, where we'll be like, okay, something's happening outside and inside. So you're measuring something outside, and inside you're feeling something. So there must be some correlation. This concept is still being used today. So yeah, didn't get like too far. And what is kind of interesting is that at the time, Koch was told he shouldn't like be doing research in this crazy kind of concept of consciousness, because it's not serious and it's like it's going to ruin his academic career. Because in 1998, the International Dictionary of Psychology wrote that, yeah, consciousness is weird, we don't understand what it is or what it does, and nothing interesting has ever been written about it. That was the kind of the academic consensus 1990. So for Koch it was kind of brave, for Crick not, because he was like this Nobel Prize winner, so he can like do it, like research anything. But this was like 1990 that we have the first kind of scientific paper on sort of the mechanisms of consciousness. I mean, that's not too long ago. And then 1991, Daniel Dennett wrote the book, very famous book, Consciousness Explained. And this was like, very influential. And he basically said, look, consciousness is like a bag of tricks. We like seeing puzzled, but it's like stage magic. Sort of, it looks like wow and crazy, but if you understand what the magician is doing, it's like, very trivial and don't worry about it. So his idea was that all this fuss about consciousness, forget about it. So a lot of people kind of joked and said his book should actually be called Consciousness Explained Away, because he didn't actually put too much on the table. And in 1994, David Chalmers came with the hard problem of consciousness. Talk about that in the next slide. And this was really kind of the watershed moment when things like got serious for the philosophy of mind. After that, kind of, we have led Bloch with this idea of, okay, maybe we should focus more on this phenomenal consciousness, so the sum of all qualia. And in 1996, Chalmers came back and was like, hey, why don't we have philosophical zombies? So he defined this as, so these zombies are like you and I. They would behave and interact exactly the same as we do, but they just don't have this inner thing looking out. They don't have this what it is to be something. So they would be devoid of kind of this inner perspective, but they would function exactly like we do. And the question is like, why wouldn't evolution try like this sort of route? And again, this like caused a lot of discussion in the philosophy of mind, where some philosophers got really annoyed and were like, come on, I mean, zombies, let's be serious with our philosophy. So Chalmers, the hard problem of consciousness is, how can stuff that is not conscious come together and become conscious? So exactly like, how does this inner perspective suddenly just pop out of stuff that doesn't have it? And this is like the biggest, hardest question in the philosophy of mind to this day, because it seems to be that this kind of breaks a lot of stuff. And basically it's just kind of this tension between the first person perspective, the you looking out, and kind of this scientific, objective third person perspective looking from the outside. So basically neuroscience is the third person perspective. You're like looking at how sort of the brain processes. This is the easy problem of consciousness, which is also hard, but in principle you can understand like how does the brain compute information? How does it store memories? Kind of all these things you could look from the outside. This is the easy problem, but the hard problem is like, why does it suddenly feel like to be something? Where does this come from? And in 2019 in Lucerne at the Theory of Consciousness conference, David Chalmers said, nothing in the field of subjective consciousness is easy. So, yeah. This is where we are today. This is a study from last year where the person looked at all the theories we have of consciousness. It's like 200 in all different, like quantum or whatever, everything. So this is the state of our academic understanding of consciousness, which means we have no idea what consciousness is from a Western perspective. Like everybody has their own kind of whatever pet theory. I mean, this is a terrible state of affairs. This is 2024. This is what we know about consciousness. It's like anyone can just like chip in, it seems. So why is this? What's the problem? Well, the nature of consciousness and reality are metaphysical problems. They're not scientific problems. If you think about it, this kind of like moves the goalpost a bit, because if it's metaphysical, then basically everyone can have like their personal feelings about what it should be. And this is why probably we have so many different kind of theories of consciousness. And although we're like, no, we pride ourselves kind of for being rational, commonsensical, logical beings, but all of us, we have our kind of core metaphysical assumptions about like why anything exists, why we exist, and these are very personal and can be like very irrational. So the whole thing, this whole setting here is kind of, it's not done in a scientific context, this is a philosophical context. So we need to talk about philosophy. So philosophy is huge. I mean, philosophy like ethics or aesthetics, or there's a philosophy of science, a philosophy of language, the philosophy of mathematics, the philosophy of psychedelics, that goes on and on. But the two main branches we're interested here are metaphysics, which is the philosophy of like, what is the essence of reality? What is its structure? And kind of a subfield of metaphysics is ontology, which deals with like, what can actually exist? So what are the categories of things that exist? And then a different branch of philosophy is called epistemology, which is like, what can I know? Like, what is knowledge? How do I know something? How can I be sure that I know something? So this is kind of where the terrain we are moving around in. And yeah, metaphysics is a belief system, because metaphysics cannot be proven or disproven, because metaphysics begins where physics ends. So it's not something which we can have objective facts about. And what's also important to note, that even if you reject metaphysics, this is a metaphysical commitment or a metaphysical stance. You cannot not do metaphysics. Even if you say, I think metaphysics is stupid and it's irrelevant, that's a metaphysical statement. So yeah, you have to deal with it earlier. So it turns out that there's just these two main worldviews. One is physicalist and one is anti-physicalist. So physicalism, this used to be called materialism. And it came out of the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, and these were kind of like very sort of sane assumptions. So rationality, common sense, and logic, these should be things that we should be like concerned about. So I mean, this is like nothing bad or like what should be not contentious in any way. And at the same time, we kind of figured out how the universe works from a classical perspective. And so, yeah, the whole universe was like a big clockwork. So if you understand like the tiny components, you understand the whole clockwork, and actually we've understood everything, and physics is over, and we've understood everything. And kind of the ontology that's used in physicalism is, so there's a material foundation. If you kind of zoom in, you find little Lego blocks, and you can reduce stuff to understand. So complex phenomena you can reduce to the interactions of the individual stuff and understand everything. So this is also kind of an insight that Descartes gave us. And another little side remark is that physicists and scientists in general, they're not very keen on philosophy. So in physics, interestingly, when quantum mechanics came, the pioneers of quantum mechanics, they were like really open to these like existential things that were happening, that they were seeing in their theories, and they were really wondering, what does this mean? But at one point, the next generation just gave up, and it was like, shut up and calculate. Don't worry about what your equations mean, what's behind them. Just do the math and things work, and you can do technology, and it's wonderful. And there's even a nice statement. People think it goes back to Richard Feynman, like one of the greatest physicists of the last century, and he said that the philosophy of science is as relevant to scientists as ornithology is to birds. So like totally irrelevant, and I find that just like mind-blowing. How can like questions like, what is a law of nature? Like, how do we know it's a law of nature? Like these very basic questions you ask yourself in the philosophy of science. How can an eminent scientist like say that this is irrelevant? I mean, I only took a course in the philosophy of science like later on during my PhD, and it blew my mind. I was like, how is it possible that I wasn't told this earlier? Like everybody who studies physics should, at least in the very beginning, have an introductory course on the philosophy of science. This is like super relevant, but somehow for like most eminent scientists and philosophers, scientists and physicists, they're like, it's a waste of time. It's just like squabbling. There's like nothing you can find out, and it just goes in circles, and it's irrelevant. So these things didn't really like help to sort of have people look at physicalism critically, and especially like if you look at the history, it's kind of in 1905 basically physicalism should have died, because then we found the quantum world and special relativity. So suddenly like space and time is like this melange, and depending on how you move, time like works differently. And then you have all these crazy quantum phenomena which make no sense, which are not logical, they're not rational. Like non-locality, things which are not connected are somehow connected and influence each other, and like these things are like continuing to be found in quantum physics, like contextuality, where now physicists realize that it doesn't make much sense to talk about like an elementary particle having some property. It's by your measurement and your experiment that you're actually putting this property onto the particle. So these things are still being discussed today, and like this got even worse. Like all this weirdness, this uncertainty. I find it hard to like if you look at these things and then still claim, well, you know, it's a physical basis of reality. It's like weird that like not more people kind of started to maybe sort of see this as a red flag. And like one important thing is complexity, so emergence. There's so much complexity everywhere around us and in us. How do you get there? Like you have a bunch of elementary particles interacting, and out of this it self-organizes, and all of this happens. Like how? Where does this come from? And it's like the physicalist says, look, that's what happened, so just don't worry. It's like, what do you want to do? That's what we observe. We're in the universe that this happens, so And I mean, yeah, life, consciousness, like these are all sort of very hard to frame in a materialist, physicalist, reductionist sort of metaphysical worldview. And like a bit more technical, but we don't even know what physical means. So this Hempel's dilemma, because what physical means has changed a lot in physics. So now we know that the physical stuff is actually excitations in quantum fields. That does not sound like a very sort of physical building block. But so as we don't even know what physical is and how this changes as physics advances, it kind of is a silly sort of assumption to make or to kind of build your metaphysics on. And physicalism is a metaphysical belief and not a fact of science. This is like the most important thing you should take away from today, because most rationally thinking people and a lot of scientists, if you criticize physicalism, they're like, ha, you're anti-science, you're irrational. But that's not true. Physicalism is metaphysics. It's not something that science dictates. Science is something totally different, as we'll see in the next slide. And unfortunately, physicalism as a metaphysical belief was never actually critically analyzed. It was always kind of implicitly just taken along because it made sense, it was cool, it was like, it's the rational thing, like why would you not want logic and common sense and rationality, even in the face of quantum mechanics? So you have scientists who are not very keen on philosophy, and then you have this one philosophical system that just kind of uncritically made it through and became the mainstream. So if we want to understand the world and we do science, then we're asking how does this work, the cosmos, and that allows us to do the technology and shut up and calculate, you get here. Physicalism is over here, like what is it? But physicalism sits over here with a bunch of other theories about the fundamental nature of reality. So yeah, physicalism is not over here, it's not science, it's an assumption that a lot of scientifically minded people make without, unfortunately, critically sort of reflecting about it. Just two geeky slides, I'll go quickly. So basically, physics is, so mathematics is the machine code of reality. That's what it is. Scientific knowledge generation is that you have reality and you just translate it into mathematics, you do calculations, and then you can do predictions. That's all it is about. At like the lowest level. And then you have like symmetry stuff, which sort of helps you guide sort of through this mathematical universe. So scientific knowledge generation is about translating structures or reality domains into formal systems, mathematics, doing the equations and taking it back. That's all there is to it. So that there's no assumption. That's just how it happens to be. And this again, like one physicist, Eugene Wigner, he asked himself, like, why do we have this unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in the physical sciences? And no one knows why. Because there's no reason for the structures in our brains to map with the structures of organization in the universe, but luckily it is. That's why we have technology. Hooray. Again, like, these are all the particles and force particles that exist, except the graviton. So with all of this, you should know everything, because that's all there is to know. There's nothing else, there's nothing more in the physical universe than this stuff. So everything has to be explained here. Like consciousness is somehow somewhere here, and like this is general relativity, gravity, these are the three non-gravitational forces constrained by symmetry. That's all there is to know. And I mean, this is kind of the statement of physicalism. And this is a very disenchanted outlook, because basically it's like, it's this cosmic nihilism. It's telling you that the universe is meaningless and random. If you see like any purpose in it, that's just you projecting. Grow up, it's not. And we die at the end and nothing, like that was it. So this is a kind of a very depressing sort of spiritual outlook that implicitly is wrapped in physicalism. And just very quickly, so there's like so many crazy things we don't know. We don't know what time is. We don't have like a theory of the small and the big. We don't know what 95% of the matter is in the universe. Like the vacuum, which should be empty, is like full of structure, and like the more you zoom in, the crazier it is. We don't even know what a proton is. Like the more we sort of look into proton, the crazier it gets. Like, is the universe infinite or not? Like half of the stuff that should be there isn't there. Antimatter. There's like structures in the universe that shouldn't be there. There's voids in the universe that shouldn't be there. Like if you measure the expansion of the universe, it's different, like with different sort of measurements we don't know why. Fine-tuning, so like these constants have to be the way they are, otherwise there's no structure. And yeah, why is mathematics so effective in explaining reality? And why consciousness, and why even anything? So, I don't know. I find it very hard to be certain about anything if we're like honest about sort of the foundations of what we think our reality is. I mean, science is great. It like figures out the how in the middle. But if you ask about the what it is, or like what's it standing on, then things get kind of scary and crazy. And so why anything? So why complexities? So complexity science is pretty new, and it's kind of the idea that you have systems of stuff that interact. Most generic definition. So this can be like a swarm of insects, or like traders in a market, or neurons in your brain. So these are all can all be understood with this template of complex systems, which is basically looking at the world as interacting networks. And complexity science is really open to sort of being honest about this emergence. So emergence is literally when new phenomena happen at a higher level. So suddenly a new level of organization is reached by the system that cannot be understood in principle by analyzing its components. So it's like kind of implicit assumption of science is that, yeah, you understand like the low level, you go to the next and the next and the next, but that's not true. Like every level of complexity in organization has its own concepts, its own ways of understanding it. So like psychology is not applied biology, and biology is not applied chemistry, and chemistry is not applied physics. They're all different levels of complexity, and that you can't get from down here up there. This is what emergence is. It's this magical appearance of something. For instance, collective intelligence. So this is something that termites built. And what these structures do, they act as ventilation shafts. So they can keep the temperature in the hive at a constant temperature. Which means that termites invented or have discovered aircon. Now the problem is, if you take one single termite, there's nothing there's no brain there. There's not even language, or where is this intelligence of this swarm? Where is it located? How does it work? Where exactly is this coming from? And this is emergence. Suddenly, yeah, if you take one single termite, it doesn't do anything. It's just stupid. But then you put million, billion together, and then they start to terraform stuff. It's what's going on here? Have we missed something in how the universe organizes because of our kind of physicalist assumption that in theory we'll understand it one day and just don't worry at the moment. And just very quickly, this was a bit nerdy. So usually stuff is distributed normally, which means height. So most people are the same height, very few people are much smaller, very few people are much taller in the distribution. Complex systems have all got this scaling law, which means that, unfortunately, if you look at sort of wealth and income, that's also a scaling law, that very few are really important in the network. So very few people have a lot of wealth and income, and very many have little. And this is everywhere, unfortunately. For wealth and income, it kind of sucks, but word frequency, citations of paper, magnitude of earthquakes, price moves in markets, sizes of craters on the moon, they're all distributed according to a scaling law, which asks or begs the question, what organizational principle is going on there? And another scaling law from biology called the allometric scaling law, where for mammals, the lifespan is correlated to the mass. So the bigger the animal, the less long it lives. And the frequency of heartbeats is also correlated to the mass. So the bigger the animal, the slower the heartbeats, which gives you an invariant that for mammals, on average, you have 1.5 trillion heartbeats, regardless if you're a blue whale or a mouse. So kind of cool. So there is organization going on there. We have no clue why, what, and how it's happening. And another cool thing from complexity is that it actually comes from simple rules of local interaction mostly. So this is Stephen Wolfram, a physicist, entrepreneur, computer scientist, and he was hey, if you want to really understand what's going on in reality, we have to understand it as a computation, sort of simple rules giving rise to complexity. And he wrote this in 2002, I think, this thick, everyone ignored him. This is 2019, people are still starting to maybe Stephen is onto something. So kind of this sort of idea that maybe we need to rethink a lot of our assumptions, especially if it's about sort of complexity and organization. Ontogeny, like this example. This is a zygote, two fused cells. So ontogeny tells you like this is the process from this to an adult. I mean, if you think about the level of complexity and organization, from like starting with 2 cells and ending up with 30 trillion cells, inside of us we have the microbiota, another 30 to 100 trillion cells, which live in symbiosis. Like, what is going on here? Like, what is this organizational principle that we're seeing, which science is like totally in the dark about? It's like, well, you know, it's like there's DNA and that's like the blueprint of the cells know what to do. But yeah, what? No. I mean, how do you, I mean, if you think about it, it's mind-blowing. I mean, so many of these things we should like wake up in the morning and like go, oh my God, this is crazy. But we kind of like, oh yeah, that somehow happened and that's fine. And maybe one day we'll understand it, but it doesn't seem to. Somehow we fundamentally seem to like be missing something. And for you to be here now is super duper improbable. Because, first of all, the physical constants have to all be what they are. So the force of gravity, electromagnetic, blah, blah, blah. If you change them, universe lumps or distributes, you don't have structure. The proton and neutron are about the same size, 2,000 times roughly heavier than the electron. If you change this ratio, you don't get atoms. Then kind of these quantum fluctuations in the beginning of the universe were seeds for the structures we're seeing in the universe. So kind of what happened there at the very beginning at the microstructure blew up and sort of became a template for the whole cosmos. And then suddenly stars started to light up and fusion. And then heavy molecules like oxygen and carbon, the molecules we need for life, were fused together because they didn't exist anywhere in the universe before the first star started burning. But then the stars had to explode to distribute it everywhere around in the cosmos. And this is what we're finding on Earth. All this organic matter was all made in stars, which exploded. I mean, yeah. And then we have the circumstellar habitable zone. So if the Earth would be any closer or farther away from the sun, we wouldn't have liquid water. Kind of important for the beginning of life. Carbon has very specific bonding properties, as would actually silicon. But so basically, the complexity of like assembling organic matter that processes information, stores information, and self-replicates kind of only works with carbon and silicon for the specific bonding properties these atoms have. Water has a lot of anomalies. For instance, most liquids, if you make them colder, they contract. Not water. Ice expands and floats on top, which kind of is important because otherwise lakes would like freeze from the bottom upwards. And water has like a bunch of other anomalies which are essential for our life here on Earth. So again, very improbable. And then somehow organic life cracked photosynthesis and started to transform the energy of the sun. And today we know that this is the most efficient process that we know. It's like insanely efficient. Like the best stuff we can do is like, I don't know, 30 or 40% efficient and the rest is lost. Photosynthesis is this quantum process that plants have hacked that is like unbelievably efficient. Like, okay, how do you discover that? At one point, there was no atmosphere. And these cyanobacteria started to produce the oxygen we are breathing today. So they basically, these bacteria, they terraformed our whole Earth to make a habitable environment outside of the water. And then we have the Cambrian explosion, where suddenly, for no one knows why, the diversity of life in the sea just exploded. There's just something that happened and just the whole thing just went crazy and created just so many different species and forms of life in the sea, which then afterwards moved to the land. And yeah, then microbes and insects discovered that social behavior, cooperation is a good template for evolution, and this is something that's still sticking with us. And there were 5 extinction events. So every time this happened, the trajectory of evolution of life on Earth went in a totally different direction. And yay, currently we're doing number 6. So we've actually, our behavior has been so bad that within the last 150 years, we actually started a 6th mass extinction event on Earth. And the Cretaceous extinction event, when the meteorite hit the Earth and killed the non-avian dinosaurs. So actually chicken are like the descendants of the avian dinosaurs. But the non-avian ones got killed by the cataclysm after the meteorite impact. And then mammals took over, because mammals were like in a niche then. They were like little furry things. And the dinosaurs were the dominant species. And so after they got wiped out, the mammals crept out of their little niche and started the conquest of then flying to Mars. So if this meteorite had not struck Earth, things would look drastically different today, and we wouldn't be sitting here. So again, another super improbable event. And then suddenly, you have this lump of neurons that starts to become self-aware, and then we have this cognitive evolution where Homo sapiens starts to have abstract thinking and develop language and culture and mathematics, and that's where we are now. So I mean, wow, this seems to be like something we should talk about more, because this is crazy. I mean, it's like, okay, you can always say, yeah, but that just happened, and if it wouldn't have happened, then we wouldn't be here, but I don't think that's a very sort of compelling argument. So, moving back to philosophy. In physicalism, so the physicalists started out as like this rational position saying that, hey, you know, all this kind of like talk about non-physical stuff is silly, so we talk about the physical, and this is a very common sense and rational thing to do. Unfortunately, the hard problem of consciousness forces them to then have kind of weird positions on consciousness. So one is epiphenomenalism, where they say, yeah, you know, your consciousness, the thing you're experiencing now, it's just a byproduct of your brain processing, and it has no causal power. There is no free will. How could there? There's only atoms which are moving, which then cause atoms to move. So like me waving now, this is not me, my free will. This is like the atoms of whatever in the, I don't know how far back you want to trace the causal chain, but it's my consciousness is just like narrating and pretending that it was me. So this is epiphenomenalism. Illusionism, where phenomenal consciousness is an illusion. This was Daniel Dennett. It's like the thing you're feeling now, when you feel it's like crazy or like magical or whatever, it's just a bag of tricks. It's like, it's stage magic. Don't fall for it. Don't worry. This is like, it'll turn out to be something very easy and like whatever. It's don't fall for the illusion. And denialism is just like, just there's nothing non-physical. How could there? That's like such a stupid idea. Or functionalism, where it's like, okay, let's focus on sort of what the brain, like the functions it has and what it can cause in like processing. And then you have the anti-physicalists, philosophy of mind. So it started with a bit of a renaissance of panpsychism. So this has been an age-old idea where it's like, what if consciousness was ubiquitous and fundamental, everywhere, sprinkled around it? So an electron has like a little bit of consciousness, and a stone a bit more, and a plant even more, and a mouse, and a human. So you have these degrees of consciousness that are everywhere around. This is kind of one popular approach to the hard problem of consciousness. And like people like Christoph Koch, one of the foundational neuroscientists, he's big into that. Problem with panpsychism is, how do you get to a unified experience of something? So if each electron has a little bit of consciousness, how do you bring them together that they have a unified sort of experience of reality? So this is kind of hard. Then we have idealism, my favorite theory. And this is like reality's, consciousness is all that exists. So consciousness is the foundation of reality, and the physical is somehow derived from it. So it's like, goes a step further than panpsychism, which says, okay, there's physical stuff, but then you sprinkle mental stuff. Idealism is, it's only consciousness. Like, I mean, these are like concepts that have been around for ages, like in Eastern traditions, this cosmic consciousness, so like, yeah, with kind of what mystics appear to have experienced, kind of this field of like the consciousness, the God behind everything. And I mean, this was big, like in Germany with this German idealism with Kant, but then Bertrand Russell and another guy, they started with analytical philosophy, and they basically destroyed idealism as that's such a stupid idea. But now it's coming back, and it's having a renaissance, and more people are interested in it because of exactly these things, the problem of consciousness and the problem of like emergence and structure and self-organization. Maybe there is literally, or the reason we haven't progressed in understanding these things is because we're stuck in the totally wrong metaphysical belief system. And idealism actually solves a couple of problems of this. So that's actually a whole talk just on like what idealism is and why it makes sense and why it's a rational thing to think about. And then there's like more sort of philosophical stuff like neutral monism, which says, okay, there's mental stuff and there's physical stuff, but they both come from something underlying, and it's the same thing, but we don't know what it is, and we're not going to call it anything. So there is the two things, but they are kind of an expression of some underlying, unifying, whatever, or neutral stuff. I don't know. It's kind of popular, but I don't find it very compelling.
How is neutral monism different than idealism?
Idealism is only consciousness exists. Neutral monism is like there is the physical and there is the mental, but they're both expressions of the same underlying whatever it is, which they don't name.
Or they don't call it consciousness.
Well, it's just the mental and the physical, where the mental and the physical, those two things are derived from the same substance. So, I mean, kind of the explaining this duality, which is like the old thing from Descartes, where he's saying, hey, mental is something, physical is something, they're separate, there's no way you can get the two together, so forget about it. And yeah, just to sort of give an idea of what we like talking about, there's like weird things that we know about. So the Lancet is like one of the most prestigious medical journals, and they had a case of 40-year-old French man who went to the doctor with a pain in his leg. And after diagnosing him, they figured out that he was missing 90% of his brain. It was all filled with liquid. So he scored quite low on IQ, but he was married, he had kids, and he had a job. So he kind of functioned as a normal person in society. So the question is, how do you do that with only 10% of your brain, if your brain is the thing that does the consciousness? So this is kind of weird. And then you have savant syndrome, so where people have like these very special gifts, but savant syndrome can happen if you bang your head. So one guy jumped into a pool, hit his head, and now he's a virtuous piano player. Or some other guy, he got mugged and had a head trauma, and now he's like, he can do these incredible mathematical fractal drawings and stuff. So it's like you damage your brain and suddenly new qualities can appear in consciousness. That seems weird if the brain is the thing that's responsible for the consciousness.
Sorry, couldn't be that just because of these events some new neurons connection appear and create
but it's brain trauma. It's literally breaking the brain. So it's breaking connections. It's literally damaging your brain. It's making it less the thing that it was before.
Maybe damaged part and another part emerged.
Which also is weird. So why would you have this suppression?
New synapses, new connection, new pattern.
Yeah.
That normally one doesn't.
Yeah. But that
drive. Let's say so it's like many streets. We drive only part of them.
Yeah. But then the question is like, why would we have all these qualities that are suppressed? Like, why would they be there, latent in everyone, and only when you hit your head really hard, they start to come out? Like,
I
what's
believe this is more a neurological question than a consciousness question. It's nothing to do with consciousness for me. It's more to do with the neurological functioning of the brain.
Well, if you suddenly have more memory, like the one guy who can fly over a city and then draw everything intricately, that's definitely like a thing in consciousness. I mean, this is like a person having a lot better recollection of visual stimuli before than he had before that. So I don't know, that seems to be like very central to consciousness and how the brain works.
It's again the problem that you are telling until now. It's a problem of definition. What is consciousness?
Exactly. So that's.
So if we don't have this definition,
yeah,
we can talk years about this.
No, but that's why this is listed as the things which seem weird in the standard classical physicalist conception of what consciousness is, how it works, and why it emerged, which is processing in the brain. So breaking the circuitry of the processing, and then this gives rise to new emergent capabilities. Seems like should not be happening in this physicalist worldview. That's the only thing I want to say with this. And also near-death experiences, where actually people have life-changing experiences where actually their brain should not be processing anything at all. And there's like it's crazy, the literature on near-death experiences. It's like these are crazy things that are happening which don't seem to make sense at all if it's like the brain that's producing the consciousness. And also during psychedelic states, the brain is actually processing or is less active in a lot of areas, so it's actually reduced in the activity. Which again seems strange that you're having this phenomenally rich experience at the moment. Like you're experiencing literally things you have never experienced before. Like so much information seems to be like flowing through your consciousness, but at the same time your brain seems like more idle and doing less than before. And also things with dreaming, like false awakening. So you dream that you wake up and then you continue to like live out the day, and then you awake for the first time, really. So Thomas Metzinger, and he's like into the philosophy of mind, and he had this as a kid, and he was saying the experience of kind of a crisp, clear, vivid reality is no indication that there's a world behind it. This can happen to you at any point, anywhere, and it could be, like the Force Awakening. So that you're having this experience of something which you like can touch and see and it's super real is no indicator that that's actually out there happening. You can check out his book called The Ego Tunnel. He's like super clever guy, and this is like, he's very adamant about this. And then like placebo and nocebo effect. So it kind of seems weird that your belief in something then would like be able to heal you or make you sick. So there's this one case of a person who overdosed on antidepressants or something for mental health issues, got internalized, and the doctors were like describing the situation as this person is like having severe, I don't know if like dying, but it was like having severe problems, and they wanted to find out what he was taking, and it turned out that he was enrolled in this study where the medication was kind of still being tested. They called up the university, and they found out that he was actually on the placebo. So he took too many sugar pills and collapsed and seemed to nearly die just because of the belief he had that he'd taken some strong antidepressant medicines. So yeah, there's a lot going on that kind of, I don't know, it's easy to just like gloss over and say, I don't know, whatever, but put together, it just seemed that we need a new kind of understanding of consciousness and reality, and that's what I want to leave you with. So science is about the how, not the what. Physicalism just kind of implicitly got adopted as a metaphysical assumption and wasn't even understood as a philosophical position. The heart problem and emergence are really tough for this physicalist worldview. And consciousness at the moment is a metaphysical problem and not a scientific one. That's why we have 200 different theories of it. And there's these two camps in the philosophy of mind, the physicalist, the anti-physicalist, and they both think really badly of each other because they both think that what the other camp is proposing is just preposterous and just stupid. So one camp is saying, yeah, but you say consciousness is an illusion, how stupid. And other guys are saying, well, you're saying that consciousness is fundamental, what the hell are you talking about? So this is like, it's a real, like, it couldn't be more kind of polar, this discussion in the philosophy of mind, which is kind of interesting that there's no like thing in the middle. It's like literally there or there. And yeah, kind of idealism is not an irrational position to take. That it's kind of philosophically and also from like fundamental physics a bit, quantum physics, there are reasons why you could consider this as a possible metaphysics. On the other hand, kind of denying the existence of consciousness seems to be a bit irrational. And yeah, we just have to admit that although we feel like things make sense and we understand stuff and we have great technology, fundamentally reality is really, really weird. Like really weird. And somehow, I don't know, we should maybe account for that a bit more when we think about how consciousness and reality works, and kind of like all these enigmas, all the things we don't know, which are like super weird. And yeah, maybe we can start to make sense of more things when we are sort of open to reevaluating our beliefs and understanding what are our beliefs and what is our science. Yeah, and then applying this to consciousness and reality. Thank you very much. Questions?
Maybe it's my understanding, but it looks like you. So for me, physicalism has nothing to do with science. They are
that's nice. That's great, because for many physicists, it isn't. They don't make that decision, unfortunately.
So I don't understand. Can you please give a definition of physicalism? What is meant with physicalism? That everything is physical?
At the foundation of reality, you find physical entities. And to explain what's going on here, you just reduce the stuff to these basic entities. And they exist.
Which are?
Sorry?
Which are these physical entities? So atoms or whatever?
Subatomic particles with charge, mass, spin, whatever. And then there's 4 forces of interaction, and that's all there is to the story. And there's nothing which is not physical. So everything is, so that like, even things like maths or love or kind of concepts you think, but they're not very physical, they're also like, no, this is within...
It's a chemical reaction.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, I really enjoyed the presentation. It was
Thank
really
you.
good, very interesting. The termites. So when you were talking about them, and actually when you were in the beginning of your presentation, I had a feeling that you were into the direction that we create the consciousness, the termites create collective consciousness. But then if we go to idealism, it's not about us creating the consciousness, it's about us being the consciousness.
Channeling it.
Channeling, exactly. So in the beginning I was like, oh, where are you going at? Like, it doesn't make sense. The termites create the consciousness, like, you know.
They tap into maybe, yeah, as we tap into ours as well, maybe. That's why the guy with 10% of the brain works, maybe, because he still has the receiving part.
Yeah.
Or they become even better.
Yeah, like, yeah. And I mean, that's like also something which Aldous Huxley and this philosopher Bergson was like, that's what psychedelics do. So awakened consciousness, we need to function and run away from tigers and stuff. So it's like the whole of reality has to like be focused onto something very manageable and small. And with psychedelics, this this kind of valve, so it's like reducing the information flow. And when we take psychedelics, this valve opens and we just get the full-on just hit by like the whole of reality, which is then the psychedelic experience, which is then so transcendental because the valve makes sense of like, yeah, this weirdness that we otherwise wouldn't like know what to do with, because yeah, if you're on a psychedelic trip, you're not very good for survival.
But the physicalists could tell you that a psychedelic trip is something that creates new connections in the brain.
I mean,
That's why you. It's all physical. I'm just saying, not that it's my point of view. But physicalists could say because of these substances, DMT, ayahuasca, whatever, it's LSD. These substances we don't know yet completely how they work. Probably.
Well, we do it's a 5-HT whatever receptor with serotonin which they latch to, and somehow that's how this gets modulated. But I mean, that there's reduction in brain activity during psychedelic experiences is something that needs a bit of hand waving in the physicalist context to say, no, well, actually it's still okay, and it's more about entropy and disorder than whatever, and so they try and like hand wave out of it. But it does seem that you would think that if you're having phenomenally rich experiences, that somehow your brain is processing more than when you're having like boring perception, but it's not the case.
But brain doesn't have to be the... For me, brain is not necessarily something to do with consciousness. Consciousness exists also without brain. Brain is like kind of a receiver.
Yeah, but that's already like now a kind of an idealist claim, because the physicalists would say, no, the brain is synonymous with consciousness. It's like the brain creates consciousness through the computation, through the neurons, the synapses, the electrochemical, whatever.
The brain creates experience, but experience doesn't have to be consciousness.
Well, then that goes back to the problem that we don't know that we don't even know how to define consciousness from the beginning. So experience seems to be like the one thing we try and like nail it down to, going back to Nagel and his bat. But that's again to say, it's like, I mean, in Eastern traditions for millennia, people, I mean, all these meditators who spent so many hours like working, analyzing, traveling in their consciousness, and we in the West, like in 1990 we started to take this seriously, and like, okay, no wonder that like 30 years later we still have no real clue what's going on. I mean, we just joined the game so late, which seems to me mind-boggling, that the most important thing, which seems to be consciousness, because that's what we like, the most intimate thing. Every morning I wake up in it and I spend the day in it, that academics were like, oh no, that's mysterious, and that's just, oh, that's not serious, we can't do science with that. It's like, I find that mind-blowing.
Yeah, they are right. You cannot do science with that. There is no way to do science with something that is not scientifically to be proven.
Well, I mean, you could start to take the first-person perspective more seriously, and phenomenal accounts, and something like, think of sort of a more sort of empirical, metaphysical thing, like, I don't know, taking certain psychedelics seem to create certain stable, reproducible experiences. So there seems to be a way that you could incorporate more phenomenal aspects into how you try and understand reality. I mean, there's no per se reason why it should always be from the third person perspective. But we just think it's like the first person perspective is very unreliable, and people have bad recollections and lie and have biases. That's why we can't rely on what people say. But that's just a choice we made. We could take this very seriously.
And also quantum mechanics at some point is putting us into that position that we have to take into consideration. And from my understanding, that was the problem of Einstein. That God does not create eyes. He never, even though he went into quantum mechanics almost like a father in 1905 paper, but he never accepted it to the belief that we can't do science without.
Yeah, the randomness, how it can't be random.
We have to forget that quantum mechanics is one of the starkest theory with the best prediction so far. There is no experiment that don't confirm quantum mechanics.
Yep.
As much as weird as can be, and the problem of the observator, it is a part of the system.
Yep.
I'm outside. Sorry, I studied physics. That's why
Yeah, it's,
say
it's
something.
awesome, yeah.
But the stronger things of quantum mechanics, it's bomb strong in predicting everything we saw so far.
Yep. Which is
Doesn't
weird
mean
that it makes no sense at
and
all.
this is what you said about science. So that's the scientific approach.
Mhm.
You have an experiment, you make a theory out of it. This theory is valid as long as you don't have other experiments. You don't find another experiment that's contradicts the theory. The problem with consciousness, or what you said until now, and we cannot make a theory based on mathematics, because this is the language of physics.
Mhm.
It's just a language. You cannot make
I mean,
new
people,
formalism like Dirac made it for
People are
quantum
trying.
mechanics to create something that predicts something we cannot even define.
but people are trying. So, like Koch came up with the integrated information theory, which was kind of the first way to try and formalize how kind of information processing could actually lead to this inner experience. Then you've like these research institution, this Qualia Research Institute. They have a paper on mapping phenomenal states onto hyperbolic geometry. I haven't looked into it too much, but people are trying. So there is, but we're just very late in the game. We're only now slowly starting to do this mathematization of consciousness, but I don't, I mean, it's up to belief.
Late to respect to what?
Well, like the 5,000 years ago when
Eastern traditions.
the Vedas were first kind of these kind
yes,
of.
but we are trying to integrate in a scientific, even if not as obvious. I mean, is this something that is missing in this scientific equation and the Schrödinger equation, whatever equation? Is this another variable? Let's call it consciousness. Suppose we could have a variable that describes consciousness. We would be able to describe all these phenomena that are not describing so far that you call coincidence and this. Would we have a better understanding based on scientific on this variable that we don't have so far? That you show all the forces, you show all the particles. Let's put another variable. Let's call it consciousness. You can call it as you want. If we find a way to put this in the equation, would we be able to describe our realities? So far,
I mean, again, these are speculative questions, but I mean, one valid question is that why should the structures we find in our consciousness allow us to map how nature works outside? I mean, this seems to be again, towards idealism, something intimate with the inner and outer world. So maybe, I don't know, maybe this is just also our conditioning. I mean, if you grow up in a Western society, you have in an Eastern society, you have a very different kind of understanding of what consciousness means and what kind of like the interaction with like other people and like how society functions and how like you see yourself as an individual or part of a more bigger sort of cohesive system. Or so I think a lot of it is also how we kind of have been, I don't know, trained or kind of like molded according to how we grew up, and it's really hard to see through your own kind of like coding and implicit beliefs and biases because they're just invisible to yourself. But I think a lot of the problem is exactly there, that as you say, it's like, I mean, where do we even want to go? What does like what can we even? But I think that just like that we start to like explore new things is already super cool. And I think that's a great starting point, that you can start to think of more radical metaphysical systems and think, okay, if this is true, what would this mean? Because there's this one guy, I don't know if you, Markus Müller, he works with Zeilinger in Vienna, the Nobel Prize 2 years ago for information stuff, and he's trying to make a quantum mechanics of the first person perspective, and he kind of has a toy model how he shows how kind of with very basic kind of assumptions you get kind of a coherent world with rules and stuff, but it's kind of a from an inner, like he's a quantum physicist, and he wrote a paper trying, and he's not trying to put consciousness in, but he kind of just how would you accommodate a first person perspective. And there's also kind of a bunch of physicists who are like, well, maybe physics isn't complete and physics can only work if we try and integrate the phenomenon of consciousness into it. And then, I don't know how or what we can expect or what the equation is, but just kind of starting there and being open for that seems to be something that I find very positive, which not too long ago would be like, people would be laughed at. I mean,
that's true.
Like totally you would just get kicked out of
area academia.
And also like the philosophy of psychedelics. So it's like legitimate now for philosophers to take psychedelics and take this very seriously. What does this mean? What does this say about the structure of reality? Whereas like not too long ago you